Alright, so this is one that I've been wanting to do for a while, where we're going to take a look at it. At first, it might seem very surface level, and it's like, oh, they both have Jeff Daniels, and they both go from black and white to color, and it's about going in and out of these fantasy worlds, whether it be a movie screen or a TV screen or whatever. But there's actually a lot of stuff to talk about here. Most importantly, probably just the whole concept of these fantasy worlds that we come to love so much, whether it be movies or TV or whatever, and how much they can really mean to us, and how both these movies feel like an absolute celebration of those things in a certain way, but also the way that reality can come crashing down, and kind of explore between both movies in two different ways how, when reality comes into the mix, how that can seem like maybe a bit of a soul crushing thing, or it can be something that's more optimistic, and we can embrace that it's not everything that we want may not necessarily be in our the fantasy worlds that we tend to like watching just on a screen from a distance, especially distance from a time period by multiple decades. So I think once again we're just going to kind of bounce back and forth here. I did want to put a specific spotlight on Pleasantville, because Pleasantville is a movie that I've loved for a very long time and I've seen multiple times. I haven't seen The Purple Rose of Cairo as many times, but I still remember like the very first time I saw it. I think appropriately enough, it was some really late night, like at 2 in the morning on Turner Classic Movies. It might have been the first time I saw this, and that just feels extremely appropriate. But Pleasantville is a movie that I feel like I know by heart at this point and have for quite some time, and I was very happy to be able to revisit Rose of Cairo again and kind of go into this with, like I said, much more perspective than I initially thought this was probably going to be, when I thought, oh, this would be a decent one to do for this, like, months and months, maybe years ago at this point, like a couple of years ago. But, yeah, so we do have two very different directors here, with Gary Ross bringing us Pleasantville, who started his acclaim with writing stuff like Big, and then he's gone on to do like stuff that may not that's reached acclaim but may not reach acclaim necessarily for its direction. Like he did Seabiscuit, and he did the first Hunger Games, which is stuff that especially the Hunger Games, you might not think like there's no way that's the same dude, but you can really sense when he really puts something into it, where he's, the writer and the producer and the director and all that, and how it's a movie that's really, really coming from the heart. Then that's when the greatness happens. And then obviously Woody Allen bringing us The Purple Rose of Cairo, and there's many reasons, but The Purple Rose of Cairo is actually one of the quintessential reasons why it irritates me so much when Woody Allen comes up and people say, oh, there's nothing to him because he made the same movie basically for decades, which is people living in New York and just having relationships and bouncing from one to the other or whatever. Usually older guy, younger woman, stuff like that. And yeah, while that was, I don't want to argue that that's a significant portion of his filmography. He still has plenty of super creative and super out-of-the-box movies, this being one of the top ones there. And going into this from the perspective of what exactly we're looking at as far as the fantasy worlds at play here, I was never that much of like an old sitcom person. Old sitcoms have like constantly been in my life, but I never really grew passionate about them, certainly not in the way that we see Tobey Maguire's character do throughout the movie as we build up to what's happening here. But there is definitely something there. You hear a lot, and you see a lot of comments, especially now, and it's like, while things are like, really bad with like, pandemics and wars and all the stuff that's happening right now, because keep in mind, this movie is, 1998? So, and it's interesting how completely relevant it still feels, as far as when you have people today that are saying like, oh my god, I wish I could go back to this period of time, and it's like, it could be a period from your childhood or decades before you were born, and you just watch like media or something, or you hear music and you say like, oh, I would just rather go back to that period, and that period just seems so perfect in retrospect. And Pleasantville as a movie is basically both embracing the side of that people who talk about that kind of visualize it as, but then there's also even if you just like look into history, maybe you don't want to go. Like maybe time has always been shitty, and time has always had its good spots also, and they've always been interchangeable since the beginning. And as far as the Purple Rose of Cairo, though, I might have a much more significant initial passion for what it's going for, because obviously the heart of the Purple Rose of Cairo really is the love of movies, which, like I said, I can significantly relate more to, and it's the idea of the Mia Farrow character, where it's like with Tobey Maguire, yeah, he's an outcast. Like we get that opening scene. That's a funny visual gag about his lack of confidence and how he's sort of outside the people at his school, where it's the camera kind of plays that trick where it looks, the editing and the camera play that trick where it looks like he's talking to the girl and then he's like, yards away, which is a very funny gag, but also sets him up as a character very well. But this Mia Farrow character is so tragic, where she's got this really unfortunate life. She's just really looking for companionship. Her husband is Danny Aiello, and he couldn't be more distant. All he does is, gamble with the money that she makes, and he pretends that jobs are hard to find, but really he's just not looking at all. He gets drunk with his friends. He brings girls over, and she just very casually says that sometimes the nights end with her just getting slapped. And it's this really dead end. Eventually, she gets fired in like the first 10 or 15 minutes, and it's just this really downer existence for this woman that seems like she's never harmed anybody. But for a person like that, for somebody that feels that, cast out from the world and alone in the world, there is the one piece of companionship that is always there and never goes away and is always reliable, and that is her going to the movies. And this is set in 1935, I want to say. I'm only basing that on the fact that Top Hat appears to be a new release in this world, so setting that up also is, it's like there is just the love of movies in general, and seeing her how, like, and you could say, like, there was a classic era where it seemed like every movie that came out was like the best thing ever when you look back on it, but it's like, much like the shitty periods of time we were talking about, there's always been shitty movies. Like, if you watch, like, any channel that just plays old movies constantly, you're gonna find some shit. And obviously the classics will be in there also, but it's like, you get the vibe that this is a woman that went to the movies and loved every single thing that she saw just because she was at the movies, which is something that's really intoxicating. It's something that you really, like, even if you do get cynical about movies, you want to be somebody that just goes to the movies and just has the most amazing time every single time and gets transported to a different place every time. Maybe even goes back. I've always talked about how much I love the physical media, but one thing that really I just love about the idea of having, a whole lot of shelves with all these different movies, is the fact that you watch one movie, and it basically transports you to another place. You get to know all the characters, you get wrapped up in the emotion, if in any emotion that would be, like, you're laughing, or you're crying, or it scares the shit out of you, or it's thrilling. And it's this whole big giant experience with one movie, and then you look at a shelf like this, and just this little, very small portion of every single one of these is a transportation to one of those worlds, and it's a totally different thing every time. And that's the kind of thing where it's like, you see her going to the movies like every single week, and like every single week she feels like she's transported to a different place, and it doesn't matter what the movie is, it doesn't even necessarily matter who's in it, but she knows, like, all the actors and all their background and who they're married to and all that, and it's this thing that it's just her comfort place, but her existence is just so shitty and out of her control that why not just wrap herself up in this fantasy world, and why not just let this be her life when she's not at work, and that's tragically relatable for so many of us. But at the same time, as we see her in the last shot of the movie, when she's watching Top Hat, because we're kind of jumping ahead here, but the Purple Rose of Cairo is very famous for the fact that it's ending is as heartbreaking as it is, and as much of a downer as it is. But I don't know. I've always felt like that it's certainly heartbreaking for her. But I almost feel like there's a bittersweetness to the ending. Like, I almost feel like it's almost a borderline happy ending, because the last shot always felt to me like no matter what, the movies will always be here at least. And it's like it is bleak, yes, and heartbreaking. But like the fact that she still has that one thing, and that her experience with the Jeff Daniels character didn't taint the movies enough that she can still find that happiness in them. Like when she's watching Top Hat, then it's I feel like there's something optimistic in there, just as there's something very optimistic in the ending of Pleasantville, despite all the change that the characters have gone through. Because another thing that these movies do so well as far as establishing their worlds, I guess I should stop right here real quick and say that even though this is the versus setup and it's like, oh, does this one do this better or that better or whatever, I feel like a lot of this is just going to be these two movies are both accomplishing the same goal in different ways that are really passionate and really successful in what they're doing. So this is mostly going to be a love fest, but I might say every now and then one does a certain thing better than the other. But another thing these movies do so beautifully that I love is capturing these moments that we're going back to, where it's like when you watch the Pleasantville show inside the movie, and we see those clips, it's like we know William H. Macy. We've seen him in a billion movies and know him very well, and Joan Allen the same way. Seen her in a billion movies, seen all kinds of different performances, whatever. But when they're watching the show Pleasantville, William H. Macy and Joan Allen and the Bud and Mary Sue actors that are in there also look very, very much like it looks like a show that really existed with these actors in it, which is really amazing. I will say that what I think that Purple Rose of Cairo does better here is that Macy and Allen and the kids look very much of that era, and that looks like a show that exists. But when we actually see scenes from the Pleasantville show, it does kind of feel like it's just more of a send-up of, oh, look at all these different, like, all the different sitcoms had sort of the same cliches at that time, and it's just kind of a gathering of those, and it's like, oh, this is a representation of, this show and this show and this show, just kind of combined in one. And they're all little tropes that we recognize, that we associate with 1950s sitcoms. I feel like The Purple Rose of Cairo has a bit more specificity in that regard, because when you see the movie within the movie, The Purple Rose of Cairo, it doesn't just feel like, oh, this is like that movie and this movie come together, like it's kind of doing a parody or a send-up of that. It just makes The Purple Rose of Cairo, the movie within the movie, feel very much like a real movie from that time. Where it's like like you could, flip through Turner Classic Movies at any time of day, and if there's some random movie you've never heard of, there's a very likely chance that it captured the essence of that, and you could see, like, you could just imagine any clip that we see of the movie within the movie would be just in there somewhere, and it would just totally blend in. And I love that they kept that up when Mia Farrow goes into the movie also, because that's another case of, it's kind of remarkable how much the actors look like they're of the era, particularly Daniels and Edward Herrmann, and really just everybody in those scenes, to where it's almost eerie, and the way they were able to capture that, I feel like that's the sort of kind of make or break of a movie like this, where if you're going to set up that world, you have to really, really know the stuff that you're talking about. And it's clear that Woody Allen has a clear love for the movies like the movie within the movie of Purple Rose of Cairo, which is great. And what's interesting about this now is the fact that as we go into these worlds and we're bringing this reality, it starts with, because in Purple Rose of Cairo we eventually get it both ways, but the opposite effect here obviously is that our characters from the current go into the show, whereas in Purple Rose of Cairo most of the time it's the character from the movie coming out. But it still kind of has this same sort of thing that it feels like it's saying about the reality versus fantasy and how those clash eventually. and it's like when we go into Pleasantville, we see, the really elaborate breakfast that nobody actually has time for in real life. The fact that a cat being stuck in a tree is cause for that's the only job the firefighters have. There's when they're in gym class and every single basket goes in. And what's interesting about that, though, in the way they play into the rules, like how the rules stay within, like how there's literally nothing outside of Pleasantville, and like geography is just talking about the streets, and just how nobody finds this odd, and the way they play with the rules in the Purple Rose of Cairo, where it's like Daniels' character can't do anything that his character doesn't know how to do. Like when he starts to kiss somebody, he's under the impression he's just gonna fade out. He has no idea what to do afterwards. He knows how to drive a car while it's running, but he doesn't know how to start it because when scenes start, he's already driving. And it's like the details like that are so insanely specific. You just can't help but admire so much how clever the writing is and stuff like this. And it's also very... Because it seems like with that concept and getting into the rules and the details like that, it could be really complicated, but... I think the really great thing, especially about the Purple Rose of Cairo, is how completely uncomplicated it is about its concept. And how... Because when you look at it, like... I've been talking a lot lately about how it annoys me how much people get held up on realism when they go to movies now, regardless of what the movie is. Even if it's a fantasy, people will say, oh, that wouldn't happen, or that wouldn't work that way. And it's like, I love the idea of... You go to especially in the 30s, you go to a movie to see something fantastical, something that you're not going to see in real life. Like, that's kind of the point. And when something really fantastical happens, where an actor just literally walks off the screen, the movie asks us to just go with it. There's no explanation for it. And the characters don't even... They're characters that are say, like, oh, that's impossible. And then they don't think about it anymore. That's all. They just say, oh, that's not possible, that can't happen. And then they just... But it is, so we're going to have to go with it. And then they just speak about it logically the rest of the way, as if it's... This is the occurrence that has happened, and now we have to deal with it. And I love the way you bring in the realism, where there's... Obviously, the whole concept of Pleasantville's movie is that it starts off showing how perfect this world seems, and then as things start to change and characters start to change, what we've once seen and may still see as real life conflicts actually start to happen with these people and it kind of starts to mirror what's actually happening in the outside world between the years of Pleasantville existing and then in 1998 when the rest of the movie takes place. But here, as far as like how cynical the real world can be versus the fantasy land of movies. I love the way they blend this into, but I think, before I give examples, I do need to say absolutely that I think the best thing about... I was going to say Purple Rose of Cairo specifically, but I feel like the best thing about both of these movies is how there's there's certainly cynical characters in it, but I feel like the movies themselves and Gary Ross and Woody Allen writing, there's no cynicism coming from them at all. And how it is just this sort of reality, fantasy clashing sort of thing, but like there's no real... I'm trying to figure out how to put... Like it's... Like when you look at the examples in the Purple Rose of Cairo of reality coming in and the cynicism coming in, where it's like, yeah, something fantastical has happened. A fictional character has walked off of a movie screen and run off with a human being with intent of this romantic relationship. And you have characters coming in, like, you have Jeff Daniels' actor character come in that plays the guy and says, like, man, I'm really risking my career with this. And you have, like, the studio saying, like, they're going to want their money back and we're going to get sued. There's going to be lawsuits. And that's what their concern is, despite everything that's happened. And it's like, it's weird how real that feels. Like, if something as fantastical as that happens, and then he injects these things in there with how people react to it, and it's like this whole, oh my god, I feel like that's how they'd actually react to this. And like I said, that sounds like it could be really sort of a cynical take on sort of what the world is, and then comparing it to movies, but it doesn't feel that way at all. It it is clear that he's set up to make a movie that is a bummer at the end of the day, and how I think his actual words were he wanted the theme of the movie to be life is disappointing. And it's like that sounds almost too bleak, but yet there's still such life in this movie and such a lightness to it. And the fact that it remains very funny throughout. And it's like right up until pretty much the very end when she gets abandoned, the movie is just consistently funny throughout. With those lines that you expect to see in any other Woody Allen movie, despite the fact that he's making something significant. Like, the lines in this are so sort of straightforward and deadpan that you would expect them in like his like his relationship movies or his just sort of all dialogue and character movies. But he's inserted those kind of lines and those kind of deliveries into a movie like this to show people reacting to something that's so incredibly outlandish. And I just really love the way all that comes together. Like, you have, like I said, something very fantastical happens, and one of the first things somebody shouts in the theater is, "I'll get the manager." And it's that these very real world reactions to something this big. And there's also, like I said, just the phrasing. You'll find that a lot in Woody Allen movies also, but just the phrasing of some things, like when they're talking about the problems that could arise about this happening, and they realize that there's an actor and a fictional character that are the same person running around, and one of the guy's responses is, "Do you want an extra guy running around?" As if that's gonna be like the worst thing ever, and like everything's gonna come tumbling down because there's an extra guy in the world. And it's like just the wording of that is what's really, really funny. Going into that about bringing real world stuff into it, you can pretty much find that all throughout Pleasantville. Like, there's obviously the big thing is when we get mainly into the second half and then towards the climax. Just the general sort of civil rights vibe is very, very clear. I could see it being argued that it's like way too on the nose, but honestly, it builds up to it so organically, like as it goes on, like the way the change progresses throughout, and it's and like I said, it always feels like it's so relevant since we're always starting to look back on like how messed up things were at a particular time, that would seem normal in their time, and it's like how. It's kind of a bummer to say, but the idea of Pleasantville always seeming kind of relevant as far as looking back on the past mistakes of history and stuff like that. But it's all here. But going back to other things that it seems to sort of symbolize is that's sort of bringing unfortunate realities into it is like starting simple. Like the awkwardness of puberty and stuff like that. Seems like it's kind of at play here when it's like... Because obviously it's mainly just the, conservatism and then bringing, a current reality into a past reality is going to cause that. But I feel like if you really want to, you can go the full mile and say, like, it almost feels like this representation of puberty or something when we have the Paul Walker scenes with Reese Witherspoon. Where they go to the makeout place and then she introduces him to things and he's so confused by it. Walker's delivery of "I think I might be ill" is one of my favorite things ever when he's just reacting to her. And like I said, you can pretty much see that all throughout. I also feel like, I guess this goes into the angle we were talking about before, but the really great moment when people are starting to change, and then color is coming into play, and there's the moment when it's in the incredible scene where Tobey Maguire covers Joan Allen's face with makeup to make her look like she's still in black and white, and it's like, well, here's the thing is you can look at that and say like, oh, is that a reference to like passing, like what people did back in the day when they were darker skinned, and to look lighter skinned they would put makeup on their faces and try to pass themselves off as white or whiter. But taking that out of the equation, also the fact that you can look at it like that and like all these representations of the past and history, but it's also just a scene that's so beautiful it stands on its own as far as just what's happening in the movie. And her having to pretend that she's still in black and white, even to her own husband with Macy. Macy, by the way, who is great in this, because there's a lot. There's Macy, there's Daniels in both movies, and it's like when you see some of these people kind of going through these changes, and a lot of times it's really subtle, having to play these characters that are from this era that basically leaves them almost without a personality. Like they're so pleasant, like it's almost like a vacancy, which is kind of eerie, but also very symbolic of everything that's being said here also. But it's like the way that they have to maintain those characters that sort of have that vacancy to them, that very artificial quality to them, and then as emotions slowly start to come into play. Joan Allen should have gotten all the awards for Pleasantville. And she missed out on an Oscar nomination, which has always blown my mind. But going on that, the idea of having to start off as this character that's so subtly changing emotionally. Like I said, you see Daniels doing that in both movies, and it's especially in Pleasantville also when he's introduced to the things in the world that start to give him that personality, whether it be art or just color in general. And when they're showing it, where it feels like his tone never seems to change, but the character is very much so, like, really opening up this, like, there was just this emotional void there for a while, and then it's like this character that's just bursting to get out, but the only way he can do that is through his art. And the way Daniels plays that is so beautiful and so subtle and amazing. And I love that also, those scenes, because we talked about how these things seem like love letters to their individual things, whether it be movies or TV or whatever. But Pleasantville also feels like, especially in these scenes, just a movie that's so in love with and passionate about art and colors in general. Not to mention that you could say both these movies are really romantic. I definitely think there's a nice romanticism in The Purple Rose of Cairo. But I would say Pleasantville is, like, painfully romantic in a number of ways. Whether it be the characters falling in love with each other or just its general love for the content itself, whether it be, the old time period, the old shows, but also, just color and art in general and all of that. And it's... yeah. It's overwhelming. And Macy, I wanted to go in a little bit also, where it's like when he's, the typical sitcom dad, and he just kind of has that sort of, vacant smile to him, which is something that William H. Macy has mastered, like the vacant smile that says so much. Like anything from Fargo to Boogie Nights, you can see him working that. But then here, it's like as it goes on in his what I really love, obviously one of the best scenes of the movie probably, is when he comes home and Joan Allen is just gone. And the way he walks around, and it goes from... He starts off just like he's coming home like normal, then it's maybe a little bit of concern, then it's confusion, and then it's just flat out despair. And the way he goes through that gauntlet. And then he has that beautiful emotional scene in the courtroom, like as he's changing, and that's like, that might be one of my favorite William H. Macy scenes of his whole career. He just really, really nailed that scene, and that's like when we're getting to the movie's emotional peak. Like it's crazy how important Macy is to the emotional core of this movie, when his character just seems sort of like on the side for a long time and very like sort of intentionally one note. But the whole court scene is really incredible. And I guess that means we haven't mentioned, there's so many characters to go through for both of these. I guess if you just want to go into characters real quick, just sort of in general, characters that stand out, since we're not really organized here. I haven't mentioned much about Reese Witherspoon, who obviously I just love in general. But what I really love about what she does here, and is so interesting about her character in general, is the way that everybody is progressing forward, and she seems to be progressing in reverse, but it's not necessarily... that, because on the surface, that might sound like it's saying, like, you know, oh, it's either if you're one thing or another thing, depends on if you're, you know, good or not or something. But it's like the way it's able to find this sort of middle ground where it's like it's good and healthy for the characters that were in Pleasantville to sort of find that sort of future quality of themselves and find that, you know, progressive change and all that. And then have the Witherspoon character just where it's equally, it feels equally right, that she sort of finds herself in a different way to where she's kind of reverting back a little bit, but it's only to the strength of her character, leading to a positive change to this character. And I love the idea where, like, when they have that moment when she's the one that sort of sets all this off, and like with the Paul Walker scenes, and then like everybody's just starts fucking everybody essentially. And despite the fact that she's the one that really set off this burst of emotion, she's not changing, and it's like she's under the impression it's just the sex. But it's like we even have the bathtub scene with Joan Allen where the tree explodes. Is yeah, that seems like that's what it's setting up for a while, and then of course Tobey Maguire comes to the conclusion it's not the sex, it's the changing of character and finding the sort of different side of themselves that they, and it's sort of it always feels like going into color is the sort of the start of the pathway that you're going the right direction, of what's best for you as a character or whatever. And it was such an interesting choice to have her have to go back to find that rather than continuing to progress forward, because she was probably about as progressed as anybody else in the movie when it started, and so it's like her kind of reining it in a little bit is what brought her to the place that she needed to be. I've never been quite sure. Maybe they said it in passing in dialogue, and I just don't remember, despite how many times I've seen this. But it's never quite gotten to me how they would explain that she didn't come back to the real world. But I'm sure it's in there somewhere, and I'm just overlooking it. But yeah, and then of course we have an antagonist. In the Purple Rose of Cairo, it kind of just feels like, yeah, Danny Aiello, I guess you could say, is like an antagonist of sorts, and like just sort of everybody's attitude towards what happened feels very sort of antagonist-like. But it's like, take all those qualities and then put them into one character, and you have Big Bob, the J.T. Walsh character, in his last role. And J.T. Walsh was always amazing. And people, you know, like to kind of joke and say, oh, all he did was play bad guys. But it's like, he did it so well and in so many varied ways. And this might easily be one of my favorite performances of his, the one that he went out on. And I love the way, just in general, the movie portrays him. Because it does give him that very sort of big quality. Like, the way that he's shot in general, where it's like this, when he's first introduced, and it's like that sort of upward angle from the floor that makes him look huge, and then there's when he's in front of the bowling alley scoreboard, when he's at the town meeting and the camera's like tilted and makes him look like really evil. It's like Citizen Kane shots or something. And just the way he enters the movie really says so much about what's going on here and the sort of dead-end place that these people are in and that this whole world is in at this point. Like when he comes into the barber shop and the guy says, oh, here, you can take my chair. And he says, oh, I couldn't possibly take your spot. And literally, as he's saying, I couldn't possibly take your spot, he's taking his spot. And it's like, it just seems like it's showing the sort of, the pointlessness of pleasantries, just in general. Where it's like when you're walking down the street and you see somebody you know and you say, hey, how are you doing? And it's like, nobody's expecting a conversation. You're supposed to say, yeah, I'm good too, and then you keep walking. And it's like, it's kind of the personification of that. Where it's like, there are these pretend pleasantries, when you're really just trying to get through the day, and how sort of when you play into those pleasantries and it kind of starts to erase who you might be underneath, and you just become this shell of a person. And it's like, I feel like that's where we kind of are in this, and that Big Bob is kind of the whole thing about the whole person that's trying to keep this as this thing, keep everybody as just these vacant characters with vacant smiles and vacant pleasantries. And so to see all of this sort of bursting into it, and I love the way that it's dealt with. Well, I also love how not only when the world starts changing and growing into color, that it kind of feels like the techniques, like the camera techniques, start to change and they sort of update also. Where like most of the movies just kind of shot in this very normal way, in this sort of very intentionally bland way. But then as things are starting to sort of heat up and get more into color and the characters are progressing more, we get shots like the the bowling shot of Walsh when we're like following the ball suddenly feels like the movie's getting much more of an energy about itself throughout it. And then going back to Walsh, what I was talking about was how I love that he's the antagonist of the movie, and essentially I guess we're in the show, so there's that too. And when he gets his sort of comeuppance when Tobey Maguire pushes him into changing color, and it's this really great moment, and then he does this very cartoonish exit where his only reaction is to run away in embarrassment. And what I really love about that is like, yeah, technically we're still in a sitcom, and I love the fact that even it seems like we get this sort of it's almost like a where are they now montage as the movie's ending, where we see all the characters in their new progressed and colorful world. We just never see Big Bob again, as far as I remember. The last time we see him, he's running out the door, and it's like that's pretty much the way a villain is treated in a sitcom episode, where it's like when they make their exit, we just never see them again, and the characters never bring them up again. And it's like it kind of feels like he was handled like that, which I always found interesting. So, as far as characters in this, we haven't really touched on yet. There is Diane Wiest comes to mind. The ways in which Woody Allen could really shine a spotlight on Diane Wiest is incredible. Obviously, both of her Oscar wins are his, with Bullets Over Broadway especially standing out. And then here, before any of those, Diane Wiest is effectively playing what appears to be a seasoned prostitute. Which is like when you see her in all of like her warm mom roles and stuff like that, it's the last thing you would think of. But Woody Allen and Diane Wiest are quite the dream team, and she really brings this character in a great way and portrays her in a great way. Glenn Headley, I believe, is in there also. And what I really love about this scene with in the brothel is the fact that, once again, it is a very funny scene. But it's like the way he's charming them, it does kind of start to bring back that feeling of the way we're charmed by movies in general, where it's like even when he's on the screen, even when he's not on the screen, he still charms people. And like, because that's the thing is like, you can see any type of person around. It could be somebody that's, just seems normal, or it could be somebody that maybe it's somebody that seems pissed off all the time. Or maybe it's like an older person, or somebody that just seems like they're on another planet or something. But it's like, you can look at anybody in the entire or at least in whatever your vicinity is, and you'll find somebody where even if they don't love movies, they've probably seen at least one movie that they liked or one movie that they remember. And movies are this very, very universal thing amongst people. And so I kind of get that vibe to where it's like, you would think, oh, you see this movie character and he's so innocent and has no idea what's going on. And it's like the place he is the most out of place is in a brothel. And it's like he has no idea what they're talking about right now or what they're going to attempt to do to him in this scene. But yet they all seem so enchanted by him in the same way Mia Farrow is when she's watching him on screen. And it's like it's almost continuing to show the effect that movies have on people and how it could be anybody can be moved or like sort of change their attitude just by watching a movie. Where it's like when they start off just being like really seasoned and kind of standoffish, and then when they start talking to him, it's just like he's the most fascinating thing ever. And I love the way that plays out. And we were talking about, I guess something I want to talk about real quick, when we were talking about the way Pleasantville is shot. One of the things I really love that Woody Allen is able to do is his really subtle long takes, where we have the scene where towards the end when she's telling Dana Aiello that she's leaving for good, and it's like there's a whole argument, there's her going in and out of rooms and packing her bags and all that, and the camera just kind of stays in one place the whole time and has this happen. That's like one of Woody Allen's trademarks. It was like a Robert Altman thing. I'm not even sure who discovered it first. or started using it first. But and it goes all the way back. Like Woody Allen seems to take it from Bergman. I want to say there's a lot of Bergman in his movies. But it's the way they utilize it, where it really seems like he's like made it his own thing in his movies. And there's another great moment where the camera doesn't completely stay in one place the whole time, but it's the scene where she's playing the ukulele and he's singing, and then they go over and then they start playing the piano and he sings again, and it's like this is all one shot where it starts on her playing the ukulele and then it backs up and then we see him sing one song with her and then the next song with the piano and it's all one, and it's like I love when Woody Allen does that shit. And he's and just the thing, it's like it's so subtle, it most of the time you don't even realize his long takes are long takes. And so I really love the way he utilizes those, especially here. um, as far as anything else, I was talking about how there's different things that Pleasantville touches on, especially like I said when it goes into the stuff towards the end when it's clearly sort of redoing the whole civil rights thing in this fictional world, but got there on its own progressive terms in a completely different way. Um, well, no, not a different way at all, actually. but in the Purple Rose of Cairo, it's also saying other things where I talked about how they sort of put stuff where like I could almost see you putting like puberty into it or something, with everybody sort of progressing into that. Um, as far as this being a love for movies, I also feel like this is kind of looking into the different aspects of movies that kind of go overlooked and is shining a light on them, because I guess if there's one thing you could say here about the fictional Jeff Daniels character that might be a bit of a problem is he also kind of has, you could almost say it's kind of a representation of vanity, I guess, where it's where you hear about this thing in real life, like main character syndrome or something, where it's like people are under the impression that they might as well be inside a movie and they're the main character, so everything in the world is happening to them instead of it being a whole ensemble of a world. And then here, how the Daniels character is under the impression he's the main character of his movie, when in actuality he's a supporting character that's putting a lot of worth on himself because that's the way he sees it. And it's like the way the movie takes place, where we do have very funny scenes where we cut back to the screen and the movie cannot progress because he's not there. And it's like it almost feels like it's really highlighting the importance of like supporting characters and those actors that come in for even just one scene, even, or just background people or something. It's like, because another thing that plays into it is people coming in from their other scenes. And it's like you need every single little piece of a movie to come together or the whole thing will fall apart. And so it's like you need the small things in movies and you need the small characters in movies. And I feel like that's saying something about that also it's just really great. That's something that the stuff in movies that people take for granted when they just sort of watch them casually. And so I feel like that's saying something, but I don't even know if that's intentional or not, but I would think it would have to be, because there's so much focus on the fact that the movie falls apart without him and cannot move on without him, despite the fact that he's not the main character that he thinks he is. So I'm not sure what else. I guess there's just a couple of things about the endings that stand out, and that is I love the way it goes into the transition in Pleasantville from now that everything has come into color. Everything feels so bright in Pleasantville that when they do come back to reality, it does sort of feel like there's this sort of like melancholy of sorts, or this sort of not quite lifelessness, but it's not as bright. But there's still something optimistic about it. And it's like when you see the way the color is used, where like when we see the red rose for the first time, it feels iconic. Or there's the pink bubble, or there's Marley Shelton with the umbrella, Reese Witherspoon with the red cherry. Like every time they start to insert color into it, it feels like this iconic image practically. Like I talked about before, the tree exploding, and then once we get to that, it feels so color after we saw it against the black and white, that when he's back in the real world and he's sitting here at the kitchen table with Jane Kasmerick, everything just feels there's one moment here that I really love, and that is the fact that Pleasantville is PG-13, which means that usually you can get away with 3, but usually they'll just say fuck once in a PG-13 movie. And the way they use it here is so casual and just so kind of sudden. It's at the very end of the movie, and Jane Kasmerick is just kind of beaten down, and she says everything's just so fucked up, and she just says it like it's any other sentence. And I feel like that's something that really brings us back to the real world also, where it's like this word that would be so Pleasantville as a place would have literally exploded into flames if somebody said fuck in that world. It just would have everything just would have burned down immediately. There would have been chaos and all the chaos and riots we see at the end, which would happen instantaneously, and Pleasantville would have just been no more if anybody said that. And it's like then we come back to the real world and we just see her just say it so casually. I feel like that's got to be intentional in some way. And as far as like having a sort of optimism to it, yeah, I was talking about the optimism I find in the ending of the Purple Rose of Cairo, where she still does have the movies. But yeah, there is definitely a bleakness here. And the thing about it was that since it is seen as such a downer of an ending, it is to my understanding that people were trying to convince, like studios and people like that in charge were trying to convince Woody Allen, this is a good movie, but I'll bet you could have a really big financial hit on your hands if you make it a happy ending. And he basically told them, like, that's, in so many words, if you gave the Purple Rose of Cairo a happy ending where she ends up with one of them, then it's not the movie. Like, it's not the movie that it's setting itself up to be at all. And it's like, it's... Because that's the whole thing. That's what basically we're leading to, is that you're looking at fantasy versus reality, and reality really fucking sucks. Like, it can be good. It can absolutely have its bright spots. But it also really, really sucks. And it's like, yeah, and it's... To do that would be to ignore that she's still in a shitty existence and to kind of get lost in that fantasy world. We can visit it. That's why I think it's very important to have the movies, and it's like, we can go to that place temporarily and that'll take us away, but we also have business here in the real world that we have to come back to, and we can't get lost, and she's put in a place where she can still visit her fantasy world. It may not be him, but it's still every different world that came and went is still going to be there, and each new world and each new set of actors or whatever is all going to be there. But we really do have to come back to reality at some point, and I feel like it's the fact that we leave her heartbroken, and it's like, it's not to say that she's going to be heartbroken forever, but it's like reality sucks, but it has its bright spots, and we have the movies that remind us of those bright spots. So I don't think it's as much of a downer as it's played up to be, but it is very, very sad, especially for this character that we very much feel for. So, so this is the part where I say if I prefer one or the other. Like I said, I just know Pleasantville better. I've seen it significantly more times, and it's one that I'm probably more likely to revisit as it goes. Despite the fact that it's almost like, it's like 50 minutes longer. Because Purple Rose of Cairo is so short, and it's, well, no, I guess Pleasantville only breaks 2 hours by a few minutes, so it's about 40 minutes longer. But the way it seems to touch on so much, and like I said, the way they approach this material in such a non-cynical way, in a way that feels like it should absolutely be on the nose, just doesn't feel like they never feel overbearing about themselves. But like I said, if I had to pick one, like I said, Pleasantville is probably the one I'm most likely to come back to. But I admire them both for so many similar reasons. And like I said, especially the love that they have for things like, art or movies or whatever it may be. And this being able to visit these fantasy worlds that help us get through the harsh realities of real life. But like I said, help us sort of also combine ways of highlighting the bright spots that are in reality. So that's what I felt like these accomplished. So I think I can leave this at that. I hope that wasn't too jumbled going back and forth, but I think after this we are going to start going into remake stuff. Like, for the next 7 verses will be a movie versus its remake. and that'll be fun. So, and there'll be a lot of stuff in between. I'm doing a William Hurt series kind of in between those also, where we're talking about his movies from the '80s, which was just this fantastic run for a whole decade. So we'll be going to those, and then all the other stuff kind of sprinkled in between. We'll have an awards video at the end of the month. We'll have the Q&As and the movie club stuff in between, and more verses that aren't remake related will be popping up also. So just a whole bunch of stuff coming in and out of here. So until whatever the next thing is, I think that's it.